Hi, everybody. We are continuing on with the pandemic STEM challenge makeovers, and today we're going to be talking about Frosted Forest, which is deceptively, it looks simple, and it can be if you need it to be, but it can also be really challenging. And there are a lot of great standards you can pull in for math. This is like a capital M, like double capital M STEM challenge, lots and lots of math connections here. Another name for this challenge is actually triangle trees because it's all about triangles. It can be all about cones if you want it to be. And so we are just going to dive right in. I have, like always, maybe not always, but like the last few times we've been doing this, I have been using some slides to make sure I don't forget to tell you anything super important. Yesterday, no scoop. So if you missed that, you can catch the replay either on Facebook or on YouTube. And just as a reminder, if you are planning to register for elementary STEMCon and beyond, if you use the link that you see there, bit.ly/STEMCon21, all lowercase, the Snow Scoop Challenge paperless version is a free gift, but you have to use that link. Okay, today we're going to be talking about Frosted Forest, which is what you see in the lower left-hand corner. That's one example. And then next week, we're going to continue Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, same time, same place. And we'll go through the last three, which are winter waiter, functional furniture, and groundhog graffiti, which is another one that you might look at that right now and be thinking, man, that looks super simple, or that's not good for my upper grades or even middle school kids. And you might be surprised. So don't assume, make sure you join me. Okay. All right. So let's move into this challenge. The main goal in this challenge is to make the iciest tree possible. So the triangles are symbolic of icicles, and we want to create the iciest tree. And the way that we define that, just like all my challenges, it can vary based on difficulty, age level, and kind of what you're working on with your standards. We want challenges to be as flexible as possible. Now, you don't need all of those materials. In fact, looking at this picture of some of the materials that I typically would put out for students, you can't expect students at home to have like straws or pipe cleaners or craft sticks necessarily. So again, this is a challenge that if they have some cardboard scraps, which could be like cereal boxes or tissue boxes, food packaging, scrap paper or junk mail, scissors are going to be kind of necessary for this one. So hopefully you can at least expect them to have scissors at home. A ruler is going to be necessary as well. Tape, you are going to need some kind of adhesive. So again, like I've been saying all the time, check with your students, have them check with their parents and see, do they get those extra address labels in the mail? Because I think I've shown you in most of my challenges lately. Let me pull this out for a second. I've been going through my mail and like just taking all of the address labels that have come in the mail, and I use them and I still have a ton left. So I've been using them for all my little models to make sure that that it works basically. So the ones that you see in the blue rectangles, that's kind of what I consider must haves. You need some cardboard scraps, you need some paper or junk mail. You're going to need some kind of tape or adhesive, a ruler, and scissors. Okay. And if you wanted to see what the normal challenge looks like in a normal year, you can go to my YouTube channel, which is Feel Good Teaching, and find the Winter Christmas playlist. All right, let's talk criteria and constraints. So the simple version is that you must attach icicles to a tree branch. The icicles must attach along a full side, not a vertex. Icicles may not extend beyond the branch. Icicles must not touch the ground, the trunk, or another branch. And there's an option to say, or another icicle. It depends on how you decide to move forward with this challenge. And don't worry, I know right now as I'm reading this, you might be thinking, if I just put this all out for my kids in this way, they might sort of like shut down or not be able to visualize what the directions expressly mean. And so I'm going to give you some visuals that I would use with students to help them understand this and not get sort of like too bogged down before they start designing. Some options to make this different or more challenging. You can provide triangle templates for your students if that's a possibility for you. So if you're doing maybe hybrid, the ones in class, you can actually give them triangle templates, or you can ask the students to design them themselves in PowerPoint or another program and then print them out, or they can just hand draw them. So they can do them from home without needing any of those things just by drawing the triangles. You can decide that you want to set a minimum or maximum branches, or that's to say triangles, with your students, just so that they don't make, a gazillion and take days to get this done. I would consider this challenge probably a 2-day challenge, but it depends. I'll get into that, but it kind of depends on how complex you make the challenge and how much measuring you're expecting them to do of the triangles. If it's heavy on the measurement, then you're probably going to need a second day. Um, and then multiple icicles per branch is okay. Icicles may touch at the vertices, but not overlap. I remember I'm giving you a visual in just a minute, so don't worry about that. You can allow cascading icicles, and they always have to be attached by the sides, not the vertices. We'll see a picture of this in just a second. Require or constrain right, acute, obtuse, or isosceles, equilateral, and scalene. And you might say something in your criteria and constraints list like at least one or each. It should say of each. I'm sorry, guys. There's a typo there. At least one of each, or you could say right triangles must comprise 30% of your design if you have older students. And you could even change this to a 3-dimensional challenge. And instead of doing triangles, use cones, as I was saying earlier. So this is the first part of a sheet that I would provide students with the criteria and constraints list so that they can visualize what each thing means. So when I say that it attaches along a side to a branch, the examples on the left and the non-examples on the right, with an explanation for why it's not okay, because it's not allowed to attach to the tree from the vertex. And so then down below, you can see the triangle fits, or the icicle fits within the branch, whereas on the right, it extends past it. And it's not allowed to do that. They're not allowed to overlap the triangles. And then on the lower one was an example of if you decided on your criteria and constraints list to allow sort of a cascading effect of the icicles where they can attach to each other or a branch, then you can see on the left what's okay. And on the right is what is not okay, because we actually have 2 violations there. The first one is that triangle or icicle number 2 is extending past the first one. Now, right now you might be thinking again, like I said, like, oh, this is way too complicated. Then don't allow cascading icicles. If you're like, my kids are not going to be into this, then you don't need to have that piece. It still can be very, very robust challenge. So here's another example of a triangle tree or frosted forest. It's not really a frosted forest until you have a bunch of them together, right? But you can see in this example, the triangles are following all of the guidelines, right? They're not touching each other, overlapping. They're allowed to touch at the vertices, but not overlap. They're not touching the ground. In this one, I'm allowing multiple triangles or icicles per branch, although only the top one, actually, maybe the bottom right might actually have 2 on it as well. And then here's an example of a cascading effect with icicles connected to icicles. So these are all options, but what you're going to want to do, because remember we said the main goal was to have the iciest tree possible. And so we need some way to quantify that. So your triangles are going to need point values. And here are some ideas. You could have, if you have younger students, I would say I would have them measure each side of each triangle, and whatever the longest side is of a certain triangle is sort of that point value for the triangle. So if they measure and one of the sides is, if they've got like a 5, a 6, and a 7 inch side on a triangle, then the 7 points is what they get for the one triangle. You could also have them give point values by perimeter or area, or if they're measuring angles in your standards right now, they could take the measure. Obviously, they need a protractor in this case, but they would take the largest angle would be the score. Or you can do something like combine things, like saying the perimeter plus the area, because then that requires them to figure all of that out. So if you have perimeter and area in your standards, I'd probably do both, because it gives you an excuse to have them practice taking those measurements and making the calculations, right? Quick tip, make sure your students measure and label the triangles before they attach them to the branches, because once they're on there, trying to measure is like such a nightmare. So this is an example of what you might do in upper grades or into middle school, where they're actually, on their triangle, taking quite a few measurements. They're classifying. You might have them tell them measure to the nearest inch if they're young. You could talk about rounding. Obviously, in this case, we didn't do angle measurements, but we did identify them as obtuse, O for obtuse, A for acute. And then one other thing I was going to say about this, you might notice above obtuse, you might not be able to see it very well just because of the size of your screen, but it says like number 1. And I recommend having your kids, when after they take their measurements, number their triangles, because what's going to happen is they might make like 10 triangles, and then when they go to put them on the trees, they might not be able to fit them all. And we're going to talk about a data table in a moment. It's helpful for them if they basically have, numbered or labeled their triangles. Just here are some another few examples. So these are numbers 1 through 4. And this was a reminder for me to tell you to tell them to number their triangles so they can tell them apart. This is a simple data table. You might use something like this where you might ask your students, okay, you're going to measure the 3 sides to the nearest ½ inch. Well, it looks like I did 1/4 inch on this one. And then I think this was the sum. No, it's not the sum. Oh, I know what it was. Where you see in the far right-hand column where it's the total point value, it was the longest side. No, I thought. Okay, I was gonna say that because the word for number 1, I was gonna say it's the longest side rounded up to the nearest inch, but then in number 2, I only gave it 4 points. 5 and 5. You know what? I'm not sure what I did on this one, so I'll have to think it through, but I don't wanna make you wait because 'cause that'll be painful. And then here is an example of a more complicated, data table that I might use with older students, where I'm actually saying you've got to classify your triangles by angle, by side. You've got to take angle measurements. Then you have to go through and do the measurements and then do all these calculations. So this is just a way of showing you that there are many ways to differentiate, and you can make this challenge very simple, or you can really ramp it up and make it very complicated. And you might notice down at the bottom, there's a place for bonus points. So some things you might want to do is just throw in bonus points for maybe they, at the end, whenever they've taken all their measurements, they also get to count their total number of triangles, and they get an extra point for each triangle they fit on the tree. Or you could do like, you get 3 points for every obtuse triangle you have on your tree, or 2 for every scalene, whatever. You can just make it up. I tend to give higher points to obtuse triangles because you can't fit as many of them on the tree. And so it can be challenging to get a lot of them on to your tree. And then branch with the most icicles attached. If you're doing that, if you're allowing multiple icicles per branch, then you could say your iciest branch has managed to get 5 triangles or icicles hanging off of it, then it's 5 bonus points. Or you can ask students to come up with ideas too, because they can be super creative, or come up with your own, or just skip it. You don't have to do bonus points. I'm not going to go into collaboration tips today because I covered it pretty well yesterday in Snow Scoop. And I know some of you are watching all 5 of these in the series, so I don't want to repeat myself too much. But if you're thinking, okay, I didn't see that, go find it. It's on YouTube, the Winter Christmas playlist, and it's on Facebook as well. So it's the Snow Scoop one. It'll look just like this. And we kind of covered some different ways to handle collaborating at a distance, whether that's social distancing or distance learning. But in this one, this is completely fine to have them build on their own. This is a challenge that I would usually recommend doing with partners in the normal, in the before times when we were doing normal stuff. This would be a partner challenge. So shifting it into an individual challenge it doesn't really change things too much, although it is nice for students to be able to bounce ideas off of teammates and, get some feedback and input. And those ideas were in the last video. Extensions. Obviously, anything with triangles is going to be perfect for this. You could repeat the challenge with a different polygon. So instead of triangle trees or frosted forest with icicles, see what it's like if you changed it and you did maybe quadrilaterals. Might be interesting because you could get a lot of different shapes into quadrilaterals, or you could just say rectangles, or what have you. I wouldn't do squares. Well, I guess it depends on what you're doing. I think squares wouldn't be as interesting. That's my gut instinct. I think quadrilaterals would be the first one I would want to do, and maybe rectangles, because you can get quite a bit of variety with them too. Obviously, we did a lot of data collection. I showed you some examples of data tables. Graphing some of that data would be great. Plant adaptations in winter, because we're talking about, if you're going to call it frosted forest, if you're calling it triangle trees, maybe not as much because it doesn't make sense. But frosted forest certainly lends itself to that. And then maybe you could have them compare and contrast icicles with stalactites and stalagmites if maybe you're doing some earth science stuff around now. Balanced forces, because this challenge is not just about the triangles. It's also about attaching them to the tree in a way that allows the tree to stand upright. And what happens when students start attaching their triangles a lot of the time is they'll want to build out like these crazy large branches so they can fit lots of icicles, and the tree will tip sometimes. And one of the in the criterion constraints list, you've said that the icicles can't be touching the ground, which is another way of basically saying the tree needs to be pretty much upright. It's all right if it leans a little, but if it's going to tip, any icicle that's touching the ground doesn't get counted in the points. And one thing I forgot to sort of reiterate and show you when we did the data table was the numbering of the triangles. So I have the students do all of I tell them maybe that they're if we're worried about time, if we're worried about time, then I might say you're going to make 10 triangles, and you can have 5 backup triangles. Because as they start to attach to the tree, some of the things aren't going to work. They're going to try to make a bunch that are way too big, and then they can't fit them all on. But they have to take all those measurements and record all that stuff before they attach and actually build the tree. Um, and so what ends up happening is on their data table, they're not allowed to, they have to cross out the points for any of the triangles that didn't make it onto the tree, which is why the numbering is so helpful. Okay. Balanced force, as I said, and then states of matter, obviously, because we're talking about ice. As a reminder, there are links for both of these resources. You can get by without the resource, but there is a print version and a paperless version. And that was my reminder to always be telling you about elementary STEMCon, because there's all kinds of like freebies and fun stuff coming. I don't see any comments or questions coming through, but if you are watching this on the replay and there is something that you are curious about, or a specific sort of restriction that you have in your classroom or with your kids, and you're wondering if you can kind of work around it with this challenge, just let me know in the comments and I'll come back and answer it. But I'm always, my favorite live sessions like these are always when people come in and sort of like, ask a question about like, hey, I kind of want to do this, but I'm not sure it's going to work or whatever. I like sort of brainstorming and shooting ideas back and forth. So never feel shy about asking a specific question like that. And otherwise, I hope you guys have a really nice weekend, a long weekend. And I will be back on Monday at 5 p.m. and we're going to do a pandemic makeover for winter waiter, which is a really fun one. It's usually a relay race. And I was so sad at the beginning of, well, I was going to say the beginning of this year, but really it was last year when I thought we're going to have to give up a lot of STEM challenges, and we're going to have to give up a lot of the relay race STEM challenges, which are some of my favorite. And I realized we don't have to. There are ways to adapt and make it work. And the relay race ones have been just as much fun. Maybe not just as much fun, but a different kind of fun that just really we all need right now. It kind of makes me happy that we didn't have to give them up. So join me or watch the replay if it's not convenient for you. And I will see you whenever it is, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, for 3 more pandemic makeovers whenever you can catch them. And Shauna, thank you for saying thank you. You're welcome. And I'll see you guys next week. Have a nice weekend.